The 3-day India-Pakistan war, the real narrative. With each day that passes, more and very granular details of the 3-day India-Pakistan war are coming to light. What is surprisingly coming to the fore is that India has gone out of its way to hide the scale of its victory over Pakistan in this short, sharp conflict where India has emerged as a clear-cut winner. And we are not saying this anymore. You know, the Western media, which had totally swallowed the Pakistani narratives for about a week, hook, line and sinker. You know, reality is dawning upon the world by slow and painful degrees. India has won an absolute clear-cut military victory in this sharp, short confrontation with Pakistan, where Pakistan has been taught a lesson. What is surprising is, why was India so hesitant to declare the scale of its victory, to make it known to the world? Was it that we were trying to give off-ramps to Pakistan? You know, at every step of the ladder, that we were trying, the entire focus of the Indian political establishment seems to have been on trying to end this conflict as at the earliest possible. To an extent, given the nuclear overhang, that is very, very understandable. But then that did militate against the real objective of this entire episode, and that was to impose deterrence on Pakistan. Our hesitation in owning up to our own military victory seemed to give a total free pass to Pakistan for about a week, to tom its narrative all over the globe, especially the Western media. You see, and our hesitation, our over-eagerness to seek conflict termination at the earliest seemed to dilute that objective of imposing deterrence on Pakistan, because, you know, in the initial few days of its euphoria that it had generated, self-generated euphoria, we won, that the Pakistanis were actually celebrating victory dances in Islamabad, Rawalpindi, Lahore, Karachi and the rest of it. And to cap it all, Shahbaz Sharif has now conferred the rank of Field Marshal on a failed Marshal. Let me stress that for emphasis. He has conferred the honorary rank of Field Marshal for life on a Marshal who failed. Actually speaking, it is just the Pakistani Air Force and the air defense that were involved really in this battle. And Asim Munir had as little to do with it, apart from hiding in a deep down bunker and making his family flee to the United States. That was the pathetic level of performance for which a failed Marshal has been made a Field Marshal. Now, be that as it may, we need to go a little deeper into this entire 3 days. As we are all aware, the Indian government very rightly decided to adopt a whole of the government approach. From 22nd April, when the massacre took place, to about the 8th of May, the External Affairs Ministry was the lead ministry in charge. They carried out all the briefings, all the pronouncements, all the debriefs, etc. And this was all very well. Initially, we put diplomatic pressure, then we put economic pressure of a very severe sort by holding the Indus Water Treaty in abeyance. All this came within the remit of the External Affairs Ministry. But the surprising thing was that when the External Affairs Ministry continued to be the lead agency even when the kinetic shooting, the military conflict per se, had started. For 2 days, on the 7th and on the 8th, the External Affairs Ministry continued to give the debrief on kinetic military operations. I thought the mantle should have now passed to the Ministry of Defence, because a very serious military conflict was taking place involving almost the entire western command of our air forces and missile forces, drone forces, air defence command, and of course the military commands in the western theatre, in Jammu and Kashmir and the western theatre. It was a very serious and very sharp conflict, and yet the Ministry of Defence, instead of getting involved right away and the SOPs, standard operating procedures, being set in motion, wherein in my time the MO directorates, Military Operations Directorate, MO Directorate of the Army, the Air Ops and the Naval Ops, them holding the professional military briefings along with reps of MEA, MOD, etc. The MEA continued to, brief on kinetic military operations. And that is where I think we faltered, and the propagation of our military narrative suffered, because quite obviously the Secretary of the External Affairs Ministry is a very erudite, scholarly person, but this is not his domain expertise. War, conflict, air battles, missile wars, drone wars are not his domain expertise. And the messaging was far more political. It was done by, like I said, by the External Affairs Ministry to give it a very civilian kind of a dimension, that India did not want to own up to the fact that we had escalated to the kinetic military level. Political messaging was far more important. 2 lady officers were selected, and to give a political messaging that since our women, their Sindoor had been so brutally wiped off, so therefore the women were doing the fighting, etc. It was a slightly confused melee, when contrasted with the Pakistani hands-on approach. I mean, their Army, Navy, Air Force people, they had started, ISPR had started giving, and the Air Force, military, the Air Force operations guy, Air Vice Marshal Aurangzeb, gave very slick PowerPoint presentations. He won the war on the PowerPoint, the war of the narrative, at least for the initial week. I mean, there is no gainsaying that fact, because they were able to impose their narrative onto the entire Western media. The Chinese lapped it happily. There were celebrations in Pakistan, etc. And like I said, Air Vice Marshal Aurangzeb gave a very, very catchy PowerPoint presentation, which gave the look of a massive, air battle, a massive air circus, almost on par with the World War I Reichshoffen air circus, in which, hundreds of aircraft, swarms of aircraft from both sides used to have massive air battles. And that was the era of the air aces like Baron von Reichshoffen of the Luftwaffe, then the German Air Force, or the air wing of the armies, then, the Red Knight in his triple plane, and Bishop and the other, air aces from the Allied side in their biplanes. They were battling it out over the skies in France. And that air circus made a huge tamasha. So, this now had far, far beyond that era of Reichshoffen circuses. Here we were onto a beyond visual range war, in which the aeroplanes of both the sides remained on their own sides of the border and engaged one another with beyond visual range air-to-air missiles, right? Forgotten in this Pakistani narrative The Pakistanis gave it the narrative of a grand air battle involving some 120 to 140 aircraft on both the sides. Is to start with 60 Indian aircraft, then 12 more, so 70 to 80 Indian aircraft and drones, and on the Pakistani side some 40 to 50 aircraft and drones. And he made a very graphic illustration of 4 boxes of Indian aircraft coming from Jammu and Kashmir right down till the Rana of Kutch, almost, heading towards Pakistan, and a grand air battle developing. What was the aim on the 7th of May? May I ask you? The aim on the 7th of May was for the Indian Air Force, the Indian missile forces, the Indian drones to hit the 9 Pakistani terror camps and bases as hard as possible. 5 in POK and 4 in the heartland of Punjab, which included the Bahawalpur, Markaz-e Subhanallah, headquarter of the Jaish Muhammad, Markaz-e Taiba of the Lashkar-e Taiba in Muridke, and the headquarters of the Hizbul Mujahideen in Sialkot, blasted to smithereens. Pakistan neatly sidestepped that part of it. They had failed to prevent a single one of the Indian cruise missiles, the BrahMos, the Spice, the Hammer Glide bombs. Not one of them they could stop. They all hit their targets bang on with 1 meter degree of accuracy. CEP, circular error of probability, all destroyed. A tamasha for the world to see. And Pakistan had gotten away in 2016, 2019 because India had struck distant camps far from population centers, and they said nothing really happened. They could get away. This was in the heart of Pakistan's Punjab. Bahawalpur, a massive mansion reduced to rubble. Muridke, where 26/11 had been planned, Pathankot had been planned, all reduced to rubble. For the Pakistani media, the citizenry to see, for the world to see. But Pakistan sidestepped that narrative, and it gave it the color of that the whole raison d'etre of 7th of May was a grand air battle between the Indian and the Pakistani air armadas, in which Pakistan claimed, just on the basis of the fact that, they made a very slick PowerPoint presentation. So they won the war of the PowerPoint. I'm afraid they lost the battle in the air and in the ground. Let there be no doubt on that score, right? Initially, they made fanciful claims of shooting down 6 Indian aircraft. Aurangzeb, boasted that they had the center of gravity. He used a lot of American jargon, which appeals to American journalists, of course, and a lot of the Top Gun, verbiage. And he tried to impress the local Pakistani female journalists with center of gravity and, very, very catchy, phrases like that, but which make for good copy, and for a week, the Pakistani narrative seemed to dominate till the scale of the disaster suffered by Pakistan emerged day by day, hour by hour. It grew grimmer and grimmer. It has been a colossal disaster. And then, Western experts or Western media, especially the leftist liberal media, the usual culprits of the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, etc., Washington Post, they'd all swallowed the Pakistani hook, line and sinker. The Chinese technology with Pakistani battle experience and air warrior skills had got the better of the Indian Air Force. My bloody foot. The simple fact is that the scale of the disaster is emerging with every day that passes. Let me ask you a simple question. If Pakistan, as it claims, had won such a fabulous victory on day one, what happened to the Pakistani Air Force on day 2 and day 3? You forget day 2 and 3. Day 1, it could not save any of the terror camps. They were all kaput, destroyed, banged to smithereens, smashed. Next day, it launched its swarms of 400 Turkish drones. 90% and more were shot down, blasted out of the skies, couldn't do a scratch of a damage except in some village here and there, some civilians. Right, you see? And the next day it launched its tactical ballistic missiles, intercepted to the last one, drones, rockets, all intercepted, littered all the way from J&K to Gujarat. Littered their carcasses of the drones, the carcasses of the missiles, the carcasses of the PL-15 beyond visual range air-to-air missiles intact for the Indians to now, open up in detail and get to know all their frequencies, etc. What a prize! Pakistan not only failed to defend its air bases, out of 12 air bases, 11 were hit and hit hard. 4 radars, American, Chinese, were destroyed by our horror loitering Israeli drones, right? And then about 140 terrorists, including 6 very high value terror targets, neutralized. 45 Pakistani soldiers killed in the skirmishes on the line of control. 50 Pakistani air warriors, so-called, killed along with their, very high cost Air Force assets, which I shall now describe a little more in detail to let you know the scale of the disaster, right? The worst was, and it is now dawning on the top unbiased aviation, military aviation experts in Europe and the United States, right? There is Tom Cooper, renowned Austrian military expert, military aviation expert, who is saying, I am astonished by the scale of the victory that India has won, by the comprehensive nature of the defeat inflicted on the Pakistani Air Force. He said, forget about getting your command and control platforms, trailer mounted command and control Turkish highly sophisticated platforms being blasted, your AWACS being blasted on the ground and in the air. And I shall spell out to you the exact sub-cheese of the kind of losses that the Indian Air Force has inflicted. They were very slow in owning up to these, but now they have, through a very prestigious magazine called Kranti, run by an Air Force officer. It has been leaked by degrees. I am sure it will officially also come out now, because they were very painstakingly collecting the evidence so that at the end of it, the truth would prevail. My only question is that a fair amount of the bomb damage assessment would have been known a bit earlier. I fail to understand our hesitation in telling the world about the scale of our victory, about the scale of the disaster that had beset the Pakistani Air Force. I mean, it is colossal. As Cooper tells us, that not only did we hit their air bases, we hit specific targets. We didn't waste our ammunition all over in just creating huge blasts and fireballs. We went for very specific, very critical targets which have done real damage, which have rendered the Pakistani Air Force and air defences hors the combat, dysfunctional, unable to defend, unable to attack. That is a simple question the world and all those trying to still tom-tom shamelessly the Pakistani narrative on the YouTube and elsewhere have to ask. If Pakistan had won such a fabulous victory as it claimed on day 1, what happened to Pakistan on day 2 and 3? How did its Air Force fail to rise to defend its own air bases? its crown jewels at Sargodha, at Noor Khan, at Rahim Yar Khan, and I mean, the losses it has suffered are colossal, and I am leaving the icing on the cake for the last. I will now give out to you the terrific losses suffered by the Pakistani Air Force. So far they were trying to make a big and song and dance about their claims of 5 to 6 Indian aircraft they claim to have downed. Till very gently the Indian Air Force revealed that its SOP was that because on the 7th they were attacking the terror targets and not the Pakistani Air Force, it was a self-imposed restraint. Before an Air Force strikes, it carries out suppression of enemy air defenses, SEAD. It even goes for DEAD, destruction of enemy air defenses, before it attacks the targets that it wants to neutralize. We deliberately foreclosed that option of striking earlier. We took that risk, but it was a calculated risk. India used its pilotless target aircraft, PTAs called Lakshayas, and other dummy aircraft to launch the first wave of the so-called assault, right, towards Pakistan. Those were the first to get airborne. Air Vice Marshal Aurangzeb had very proudly told us that the Chinese had given them an electronic library of the electronic signature of every single Indian aircraft, fighter aircraft especially, Rafales, Su-30s, Mirages, Tejas, MiG-29s, what have you. He said we had the full inventory. Now I hope he is a little wiser and more red-faced when he learns, or he has learnt by now, that the Indians use their pilotless target aircraft with electronic payloads that can mimic the electronic signatures of the Rafales, of the Su-30s, of all our fighter aircraft, also mimic their radar cross sections. So, what Pakistan was feeling euphoric about, that we used our J-10C Chinese aircraft, Chinese technology with Pakistani war experience, battle experience against the Indian Air Force, 65, 71, what have you, each of one in which they took a beating, right? But they boast about that combat experience in terms of batterings. But and with the two, we have created such a winning formula. Now the world will line up to the doors of Chengdu in Aircraft Corporation and Avic Aircraft Corporation in China to buy their J-10s and their J-20s and their J-35s, etc. That narrative lasted for about 5 days, 6. By the 7th day, it had evaporated like dew. It had evaporated and vanished, and reality check had set in, not just in Pakistan and China, where you can feel the gloom, sense the defeatism, pessimism in their Ministry of Foreign Affairs briefings from Beijing. So muted, so toned down, so neutral in tone, because reality has now struck, and struck hard. You know what the scale of damage is on the Pakistani side? Like I told you, 11 out of 12 air bases gone. HQ-9, HQ-16 surface to air missile batteries knocked out, 4 radars knocked out. They have lost 2 AWACS, one on the ground in Bellori and one in the air. And do you know something? India has achieved a record at the distance at which our S-400s have shot down a Pakistani AWAC 315 kilometers inside Pakistan. The last record was held in October 22 by the Russian PVO Strany, their air defense command, which had knocked down at about 215 odd kilometers, inside 212 kilometers inside Ukraine, they had knocked out an aircraft. That was the record so far. India has just beaten that record by almost 90 kilometers by shooting down a Pakistani Swedish AWAC Ariai Saab 2000 at 315 kilometers inside Pakistan. The loss of 2 AWACs is a severe loss. Now couple that with 8 F-16 aircraft, 4 on the ground, 4 in the air, lost to our beyond visual range Meteor missiles, Astra missiles, as also on the ground by our cruise missiles. Right? 2, like I said, Swedish AWACS, 2 Mirage 3/5 fighter jets, 1 IL-78 refueler aircraft, 1 C-130 transport aircraft, a staggering total of 14 key aircraft destroyed. Mostly we went, just like they wanted to designate the Rafales as their center of gravity, we designated the American F-16s as the center of gravity, because that was the most lethal plane against us in their armory. Nobody was sure of how the Chinese would perform, the Chinese fighters, and as it turns out, the performance has been dismal. 14 aircraft. You claim to have shot down, 5 to 6 of our aircraft. Bullshit. Most of what you shot down was the pilotless Lakshya target practice aircraft with the electronic payloads. That electronic library of yours was so well spoofed, you just wasted tens and twenties of your PL-15 air-to-air beyond visual range missiles targeting pilotless aircraft, which we did not own up on the first day because we used them on day 2 and day 3 to go in for your air defenses, to go in for your Hong HQ-9 and 16 surface-to-air missile batteries, as also your radars. Made them light up, made them open up, and then blasted them. Final day, we hit the Kirana, the nuclear weapons storage site. This is on the authority of Tom Cooper, who is flabbergasted that India could pull this off. The United States and Israel have still not been able to eliminate Iran's nascent nuclear capability. We hit the entrance of the deep tunnels where the Pakistani nuclear warheads are stored. They are now inaccessible. There is suspicion, strong suspicion of radioactive leakage due to radiological cook-offs, possibly in some of the warheads. And if that has happened, that entire nuclear arsenal is gone for good. And all Pakistan's, nuclear bluff is now a matter for the history books. So, I am very glad that the truth is now getting uncovered by degrees, but what it does tell, lessons learned for India are to get its information warfare act together, to be able to transition from one lead ministry to the other as the battle progresses. Quite obviously, there is a stage at which the MEA has to give way to the MOD when the shooting starts, right? And the political narrative, takes a backseat as far as the military narrative is concerned, because it is as essential to win the military war, to win the military conflict, as it is to win the battle of narratives. Jai Bharat, Jai Hind.